here to help us make sense of it all is pastor and best-selling author J.D. Greear. Pastor, good morning. Welcome.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
I have to say, when I heard the number 15,000 churches closing by the end of the year, I was taken aback. As a pastor, what went through your mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, for a long time, we've heard that it's because the younger generation isn't as spiritually interested, or even the politics of their parents and grandparents were turning them off. But I think we're seeing now that's not the case. I think what you've got is a lot of these churches are just not ready for the kind of influx of these younger people. I often tell our church that many of our older saints prefer preserving their traditions over reaching their grandchildren. I think it's going to take, a kind of a new mindset, an ability to, how does the gospel translate? One of the things that study often doesn't show is that in my own denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention, by the time we get to 2030, a third of the churches in the Southern Baptist Convention will have been planted since 2010. So in addition to all these churches closing, you've got a lot of churches being planted too. So the news is not all bad.
That is interesting. That's why we have you on this show, to give us fact from fiction. Part of the challenge seems to be finding and retaining full-time pastors. Why is it so hard for churches, particularly in those small rural areas, to keep pastors like yourself?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I was hoping you bring that up because when I grew up, every single, student camp or event I went to, there was always, kind of a threefold invitation. You could give your life to Christ, you could rededicate, or you could surrender to ministry. Those are the only three things that you could do in response to what was being preached. Well, in the last probably 20 years or so, churches just stopped doing that. They stopped extending that call to say, hey, there's a lot of you that need to consider, is God calling you into this? And so it's a very practical step. It's just saying, hey, this is a place that God has gifted some of you, and he wants you to lead in these ways.
Looking at the bigger picture here, besides being a place of worship, churches often serve as a community center, shelter, food bank. Pastor, talk about what losing these churches in so many areas means to the communities.
Yeah, I mean, the church is supposed to be the soul of the community, and it's supposed to make the community a better place to live. One of the things that the church I pastor, Summit Church, our desire is to be so infused into our community that they just couldn't imagine doing life here without us. We always say that, we want our community to say, we may not believe what those crazy people at Summit Church believe, but thank God they're here, because if not, we'd have to raise our taxes. There's a new book that I released called Everyday Revolutionary, where I try to show what that looks like when a community does that, when a church does that in the community, how to be like Daniel was in Babylon, where so bold that he was thrown in the lion's den because of his speaking truth to power, and yet so beloved by the king who put him there that king stood outside the lion's den all night, hoping against hope that Daniel would make it through the night. That's how we want to be in our communities, and it takes an approach that says, I'm not here to make war against my community. I'm not here to just condemn my community. I'm here to love and enter into their pain and meet their needs.
There is a record number of Americans now say they are religiously unaffiliated. The number who identify as Christian have also dropped to 15%, more than 15%, I should say, since 2007. Pastor, assuming these trends continue, what does that tell us about the future of churches in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, there's a general anti-institutional bias, whether you're talking about, church or government or Hollywood or anything. There's a suspicion of those things. And what it takes is an authentic expression of Christianity that shows that I'm less about gathering political power and I'm more about entering into the needs of our neighbors. I recently had a situation where someone who disagreed strongly with both what I believe and politically kind of where I would line up, they said, I don't agree with you at all, but they referred to one of their neighbors and how our church had just entered into this single mother's life and made sure that she was taken care of. And she said, I don't agree with you, but I don't know how to argue with that. I think it takes that type of living in our communities that ultimately puts the gospel on display.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.